Hello, and welcome to the Backrooms. I'm here to give you the ultimate Backrooms reading guide / syllabus possible. You may have seen the recent film, and as a literary scholar myself, I find it incredibly interesting that A24 released a zine for the Backrooms that includes the short story, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is just kind of a classic story of madness and being trapped in an ugly chartreuse room. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the Backrooms is an incredibly literary concept. So today I'm here to give you all of the possible book recommendations that you could want if you're looking for things that have a similar kind of vibe or play with the same ideas. You know, the Backrooms itself is a pretty simple concept. It all started technically, I would say, in 2011. It seems like the image was first posted to 4chan's X board. The screenshot that is circulating a lot now that most people have probably seen, and the actual year most people would attribute to the creation of the Backrooms, is probably 2019 or 2018, because that's when it was actually shared with a little bit of a background story. So it was probably posted in a thread that is like, share all the creepiest images. You have share your most unsettling, disturbing images. It just so happened that this picture of an empty furniture store really unsettled a lot of people and also lit up their imaginations. And then this all sort of took off during the pandemic and with the creation of Kane Pixels or Kane Parsons' YouTube series, The Backrooms. And there's also tons of video games, fan communities, spin-offs, other original series that play with this concept or deal with this idea of the Backrooms. And there's also tons of other rooms besides this furniture store that have been presented as a sort of liminal space. And if you're really into the Backrooms, you'll know there's levels to this. As in, there's different levels of the Backrooms associated with different imagery. But I'm not here to go so much in detail with all that today. I just want to give you some suggested reads if you're craving more that relates to this concept. So before I found my fiction recommendations, I did a little bit of research because I just can't help myself. So I did go exploring in the abandoned or just hit by a recession, slightly empty, depressing casinos of Las Vegas, including Circus. As you can see the clowns on my shirt. So I did some physical exploration to get a really good grasp on this concept. And additionally, I did some actual reading. So one thing that I found quite interesting as well is that the term liminal comes from anthropology, from Arnold van Gennep, in his book, The Rites of Passage, talking about transitional states. But anthropologists today who have studied online fan communities surrounding the Backrooms have found that the word liminal has kind of taken on a new meaning. So instead of a space of transition or movement or something in between that, will eventually transform or become something else, it actually comes to represent stasis. So a lot of these liminal spaces that people are interested in today are actually so affective because they are representing something trapped in time or something left behind. So it is interesting how the discourse has changed, which is why a lot of people are always like, why is this liminal? This is not actually liminal. It's because the wording has actually kind of transformed in how it's been used. So the wording has kind of undergone its own liminal transformation to express a new feeling that people are getting from these images and spaces. And the Backrooms is also incredibly tied to aesthetics like vaporwave or dreamcore that are probably worth a whole video on their own. But for today, we're going right through the Backrooms. So if I was to recommend you other theoretical books to get started, it doesn't hurt to just read Sigmund Freud's essay, The Uncanny, where he elaborates on the idea of the uncanny or unheimlich. It's something that is similar to home, but different enough to be extremely uncomfortable. And something interesting is that Freud himself kind of describes a Backrooms-like experience in this essay because he talks about traveling and wandering these Italian streets, and he keeps trying to leave and find his way out of this sort of a back alley he found himself in, but he just keeps returning to the same spot. And something interesting about the uncanny is that it recurs in a way that feels impossible. So, you could consider something like a haunting uncanny, in that someone who was here has gone and then returns again in the form of a specter, which shouldn't be possible. Same as if you make a left turn while you're walking through a street and somehow find yourself back in the same spot. It defies reality as we understand it, which exactly describes the Backrooms. So the uncanny actually challenges our sense of perspective and our sense of reality. One essay that might be of interest to you is Backrooms and the Rise of the Institutional Gothic by Shira. And this covers the idea that the Backrooms is a new iteration of the Gothic aesthetic. So instead of creepy old mansions and vampires, haunted castles, we have these empty boardrooms and hotel hallways that have just been abandoned. Another interesting theoretical thing to read, if you're interested in this concept, is probably just The Weird and the Eerie by Mark Fisher. Here he introduces these two concepts, the weird and the eerie respectively, with the weird being something that is present but doesn't belong, sort of like a Cthulhu monster, or the eerie, which he defines as being constituted by a failure of absence or by a failure of presence. So something should be there, but it's not, or something shouldn't be there, but it is. A little bit of a strange concept, but you can think of something like Stonehenge or the Easter Island heads, I believe he brings up. So you're just wondering, how did this get here? And it just raises so many questions. Same as the Backrooms, what are they? Who put them there? Is it something alien? How do they even exist? Or liminal spaces being eerie and creepy because they're empty when they should be full of people, especially for the imagery that has to do with things like play places or theme parks or where children should be playing. I don't know. I just think that is super creepy. Like, where did they go? Now, Fisher takes these concepts to a whole nother level because he sees the weird and the eerie as expressions of the outside, something outside of the sort of Oedipal triangle that Freud would talk about, or the family structure. It's something totally alien to human nature, human beings, something that we can't really comprehend, or a force that acts upon us rather than something that we can control. Mark Fisher, of course, ties this into capitalism. So I definitely think this is relevant when thinking about the sort of empty offices or empty third spaces. I mean, that's kind of the actual process of a dead mall, in that we have moved to online shopping, and the economic forces that guide the arrangement of the systems that we live in have decided basically for us that physical shopping is no longer in demand. Or based on our habits, our collective habits, outside of any singular person's choice, these malls have become sort of irrelevant, leading to these huge, monolithic, empty spaces or empty cathedrals of capitalism. And even in my explorations, I have found these huge designer luxury stores that had to exist because there is a market for it, or in some way it pays off, but it doesn't really matter if people are there shopping or not. It doesn't really matter if most people can afford it. They have almost a will of their own to exist, to enforce themselves on us. But nonetheless, they're able to have a presence. Now that I've gotten that pretentiousness out of my system, let me recommend some solid reads to you. To give you a quick rundown of the Backrooms canon, I'll just list off a couple that are extremely popular recommendations when it comes to this sort of thing. So the obvious one is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. Another popular choice is Piranesi by Susanna Clark. And then some others are A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck, The Raw Shark Texts by Stephen Hall, Horror Store by Grady Hendrix, The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, Subcutanean by Aaron A. Reed, Strange Houses by Uketsu, and We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kluwer. Now, those are the ones you can probably find in other videos, or if you were to search the internet or ask on Reddit, the replies that you would get. But I wanted to use my video to share some of my own personal choices. So, let's just start swinging right out of the gate with Amygdalatropolis by by B.R. Yeager. I'm recommending this book, but I'm also not recommending this to like 95% of people. It's kind of not safe for life. This book is about someone who completely lives in their bedroom and basically spends their entire day scrolling forums like the 4chan that the Backrooms originated on. But honestly, I'd say the book covers even darker boards and even darker areas of the internet. It really goes into the bowels of the web. So this one, it's kind of it's a sort of exercise in disgust, but I feel like it captures that sort of urge that the original image appeared with in wanting to see the horror, wanting to see what are the most unsettling images possible, what is truly like trying to share the most haunting content you're able to find online. So it really ties back to the origin point, I'd say. And if the Backrooms is about being in a place where you feel like you shouldn't be because something's off, this is sort of the digital equivalent of it. The book recreates text from what could be video games or what could be message boards or online chat rooms, and it gives you the feeling that you've pulled up a website that you really should not be looking at. It just really gives you that sort of abject feeling of discomfort of seeing something you know you shouldn't see. And what made it extra creepy for me is that I read an ebook digital version, and there was all these like Onion and Tor links that were actually clickable. And maybe I would have clicked it and I would have just gotten an error and the page would not have existed. But I definitely was not going to try to click on those. I was terrified. So it's actually an extremely engaging reading experience. At least I thought so. So I would really highly recommend this one if you think you can stomach it. And I've also heard Negative Space by B.R. Yeager is another good choice for this aesthetic, but I just haven't personally read that one yet. And if you're at all interested in any of these stories that have to do with mazes, labyrinths, or impossible spaces that sort of fold in on themselves, you absolutely have to read Jorge Luis Borges. He is kind of the originator of all of this, and he is a sort of watermark writer in the history of postmodern art. So most of these stories really got their inspiration from him and his literary experimentations. I know especially the book A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck is heavily influenced, and I believe even mentions the short story by Borges called The Library of Babel. So you might just read The Library of Babel and see how you feel about his style, and then maybe check out more. His short story On Exactitude in Science was also the inspiration basically for Jean Baudrillard's theory of simulacra. So if we're talking about online imagery, liminal spaces, retro aesthetics, vaporwave, dreamcore, anything like that, the simulacra is kind of always hanging over us. So that is a concept extremely relevant here. So again, you can see how this actually works out in fiction, or go back to a key inspiration for Baudrillard when you're reading Borges. So I would recommend honestly just picking up collected fictions or fictiones or any massive collection of his work you can find and just going through those short stories. They're always very interesting. Another great recommendation here is the Southern Reach series by Jeff VanderMeer. I do have these here, and I wish I honestly had all of them with this cover because this cover is so cool. But basically this was a trilogy, but a fourth book did get released, and this series, I would say this series is very similar to the YouTube version of the Backrooms by Kane Parsons or Kane Pixels, because much like the YouTube lore, because there's a sort of government entity here trying to control and manage something that defies human comprehension. And much like the Backrooms is this sort of impossible space that Async wants to use for storage in the lore, the Southern Reach series focuses on something called Area X, which they're trying to control and contain because it has the ability to sort of mutate things. And this book is also one that will give you plenty to think about. It has some really interesting reflections on language and storytelling and how that can shape us and shape the knowledge that we create. So it's also really aligned with that Borges On Exactitude in Science story. So this one is honestly a personal favorite that I would highly recommend. Another sort of out there recommendation that I would give is My Work Is Not Yet Done by Thomas Ligotti, because it really taps into that sort of corporate or institutional horror that I mentioned at the start of the video. So if you like imagining the Backrooms as an office with horrible, harsh lights and reflecting on how empty and isolating work can be, then this is probably the book for you. So this one, it's definitely a lot more violent and a lot more populated than the Backrooms, but there is a sort of section at the end that has these short stories or short vignettes that relate to some sort of twisted corporation that has really disturbing training videos and dubious intentions. If you know anything about Thomas Ligotti, just know that he is deeply pessimistic, and this book unleashes that into these sort of dry corporate offices. So if that sort of aesthetic interests you at all, I would highly recommend that one. It's pretty different from his other work in that it doesn't take place in a carnival or a puppet show or a gas station or something like that, and it entirely focuses on this sort of office culture. And then my final recommendation would be Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. And this is one that Mark Fisher does mention in The Weird and the Eerie as an example of the Eerie, because without giving too much away, this is a book about space exploration to a planet that has a very strange ocean. I feel like I have to include this one because another popular rendition of the Backrooms is The Pool Rooms, which is basically the same as the Backrooms, but it's sort of like a creepy abandoned pool. So it just felt wrong to not recommend some book that has a significant amount of water in it. So honestly, this one also very well fits the theme, and it might even be similar to the A24 movie if you're thinking about it that way. So in Solaris, there is space exploration, and this group of scientists and researchers ends up on a planet that has a very strange ocean, a huge body of water covering the planet that starts to have a strange impact on them. And basically, their old memories resurface. So it brings up questions about what is real, what is a hallucination, and also questions about what is this ocean? Is it intelligent? Does it have a mind of its own? Does it have goals or desires? Or is it something that we simply can't comprehend? So this one brings up similar questions that the Backrooms would, as in, what is this space? What does it want from us? And why does it even exist? And one note I would make is that this is definitely a dated space colonizer sort of sci-fi book. So just know what you're getting in for. There's definitely some things in there that kind of took me back, but it is an interesting concept. So that being said, those are all my personalized recommendations for those who want to read something similar to the Backrooms. But if you want even more, you can check out my Substack at nontent.substack.com or look for the link below. I'll put it in the description, because there you can see that I've written out a complete post where I put all of this in writing and recommended even more stories, especially short stories and relevant essays. So you can find the links to all of that below. And hopefully all of this reading will help you find your way in the Backrooms, or at the very least, help you be less bored while you're stuck there. So that's all from me. Thanks for listening to my nonsense, and have a good one.